Since it's been 2 weeks, let's just quickly review what we went through that leads us up to this point. Because chapters 4, 5, and 6 are kind of together, you need to know what goes on. And because I like to review, just to clarify what we've learned in the past and continue to keep ourselves and our minds in context of what's going on in the current time that we'll be going through. So if you'll recall, the Lord was at work among the Israelites in chapter 4. And chapter 4 is right after, obviously, chapter 3, which spoke of Samuel's call. We see his prophetic introduction to the office there, his inauguration as the prophet. We recall that that his first prophecy that he was given, he was to declare the condemnation of Eli and Hophni and Phinehas, and ultimately the house that would come from that line. We also remember that Samuel was very young when that came about. We don't have a specific age, but he was very young when this ministry started. So we see there the Lord was at work in chapter 4. And in chapter 4, what we go through is Israel goes to battle against the Philistines. They are defeated at first. They go back to go regroup. And what they do is they get the Ark of the Lord, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. They did that because it was pretty typical in those times to bring, for them, it was historical in the sense they brought the Ark of the Covenant with them as they went into battle. When you think of the most famous battle in Scripture of the Battle of Jericho, how the Ark went and traveled around with them. We also know, again, just to recall our minds to it, that the Ark of God, the Ark of the Covenant of God, was that piece of furniture that was put into the tabernacle and then ultimately put into the temple where the presence of God resided. When he was here on earth, when his glory was here, some use the phrase, the Shekinah glory, which is interesting. It's not a biblical word. It's not a Hebrew word. But when I use it, I know most people understand what I'm talking about. We'll use it that way if I use it again this morning. God's presence, his glory. But it was there on the ark when God met with the high priest to atone for sins in that sacrificial system. He went upon the Ark of the Covenant. So the Israelites would bring that around. It was a representation of his presence. It was a reminder of his presence. From what we understand from Scripture, when they brought this thing out, the glory of God wasn't sitting on top of this ark, too bright to behold. That wasn't the case. But again, they had confidence because this is where God met us as a nation. This is where God was. And again, going just culturally, that wasn't something that was unusual. People would, other nations worshiping other gods would bring their religious relics, if you would, with them. Their religious furniture, another way to phrase it, with them to show who they worshipped, and hopefully their God would work with them through that. But we see in this chapter 4 that the ark comes the second time in the battle, and what happens? Israel is defeated again. And not only that, but the ark gets taken away from them. It gets captured by the Philistines. In this, we question what's going on. Like I said, we don't hear anything from Samuel. But what we do is hear and see is that God was, and I don't have the verse written down, but when he talks, here in chapter 3, verse 19, he says of Samuel, "And Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did not let none of his words fall to the ground." This was God not letting his words, the prophecy, fall to the ground. And again, we know as a prophet of God, it wasn't about what they said as far as their character or their personality. They were sharing God's word. And ultimately, he was upholding God's himself. God was holding his own word, showing his faithfulness to that. But in these chapters 4 through 6, we see him fulfilling and not letting these words fall to the ground. I know I'm going back and forth, trying to review here, but bear with me. So the ark is taken from the nation of Israel, but we also recall that who went with the ark? Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's wicked sons. And I believe what was going on there, it was God, the Israelites went to get that ark, bring it out, and of course Hophni and Phinehas went out with them. That was God drawing them out to that battlefield to be slain, and that's what happens. So, and then going on through the chapter, we find that a messenger runs up. The Israelites were excited to have the ark. It was taken. They were devastated over those things. An individual from the tribe of Benjamin runs out back into the city. I believe it was there in Shiloh, to tell Eli what had happened. The whole group of people that were out there were mortified that they had been defeated, but that the ark had been taken. And who knows what their opinions about Hophni and Phinehas were. They weren't big fans of them, so maybe they were happy in that regard. But ultimately, Eli dies also. And he falls over backwards in his chair, and his neck breaks because of his age, and he said he was heavy. But he fell over backwards in shock, not because of his son's death, because he knew that was coming, but because the ark was taken. So we see that the Lord is working amongst the nation there and fulfilling his word, showing that he was faithful to fulfill his word in that. Just a quick thought as we're reviewing even this morning. Consider this. Consider the fact that God was working even in these trials. When Satan and the flesh want to deny God's constant faithfulness in your life, he is always there. That's what we're getting at this morning. That's the whole kind of thrust of the passage that we'll go through. One point that I want to bring out is God is at work. He has not left us at any point in time, just like he's never left anyone in the nation here as well. Also in verse 5 or chapter 5, what else do we learn? And we saw that the ark was moved into the Philistine camp. So God was at work with the Israelites in chapter 4. God is working amongst, not in a good way, the Philistines in chapter 5. God showed his superiority before Dagon and the Philistines' supposed might against Yahweh. So chapter 5, what we have is the ark comes into the camp of the Philistines, where they resided, and immediately what they do is they bring that ark into the temple of Dagon, and they set it before their God. And there's a lot of things that I want to unpack this morning in regards to all these things. But recall what happens. Opportunity to speak out. Who remembers what happens to the statue of Dagon? Okay, it falls down. It falls down 2 times. The statue's there. It falls down as if it's bowing down to the ark. And I don't think that was a mistake. Falling face down. It's another thing about just in generalizing sin and worshiping of all those things that aren't God. It's silly. It's really, if you think about it, and I've laughed in the thought process of it. Maybe that's not the best emotional response to it. But here they are, this great God that won them the Ark of the Covenant and beat Yahweh is now laying down and face down in the temple. And what do? They can run over there and they go pick their God back up and set him back on his pedestal because what? Their God is not competent enough to get himself back off the ground? Well, he's not God. Second time it happens, his palms are broken off and his neck is snapped off. And one commentator I shared last time defines what was left. It said his fishy parts were left because Dagon was thought to be a merman, I guess you should say, not a mermaid. So he had a physical body of a man up top, a head and arms, and then his lower part was a big giant fish tail. But they worship this fish god Dagon. So God's working there. God was not defeated. He was making it clear. We don't know what the Israelites heard about this. We don't know if they knew anything until the ark came back to them, which we'll get into today. But he was definitely speaking to the Philistines, saying, "Oh, I have not been defeated. This is, and let me show you." And the thing is, if you just go through some of the things historically with God and see how he's working and just how wonderful it is as he proves his might and his control and his sovereignty over all things, even when it's times when we're worshiping things we shouldn't be focusing on, and God shows they're not worth your time. Don't focus on them. Obviously, he's going a little bit harsher here with these. But you even go back to the Egyptians and the different plagues that came about. Some have said there was the first I heard about it was during my Pentateuch class in Bible college where our professor, and just a side note, at least me personally, I don't know about Brent and my wife, but there were times that I would just be taking notes. I wouldn't even be taking notes. I'd just be enthralled with what he was saying and realizing, oh, he's the toughest professor we have. I better be taking notes on everything. But he had a lot of information that was very interesting. That's free this morning. You didn't need to know that, but that's kind of like dessert, I guess. So he was saying, in this particular professor was saying that as the Lord was working in these plagues with the Egyptians, that he was almost attacking their worship of these different things through bringing a plague about to show that he was God, but destroying their gods and their pantheon. So God's at work here amongst the Israelites in chapter 4. He is working there in the Philistine camp in chapter 5. And as I said, there's all that's going on. There's a plague that comes about, and they are burdened, I guess you could say, or stricken with tumors. The King James phrases it as emerods, but that just basically means tumors. So there's the quick review that we have. And as I said, as I was going through this, sometimes we sit here and look at our own lives and we think, is God working? Is he here? I feel like he's gone. Sometimes we ask questions. Is it something I've done? Is there things that I need to get right? Which are the wrong questions to look in your life to get dealt with, especially if you're trying to renew fellowship and it's been broken. But know this, God is never gone. He is always there. He's always doing something. He's working in some way. We can never say that God has abandoned us. We can't fear like the Israelites were, and that the Philistines were trying to prove that God had been defeated, that Yahweh was just another Elohim, another God that was just the same as their God Dagon, but at this point, lesser. So we start chapter 6. And here we see the Philistines test Yahweh. God made it clear he was not to be compared to the other idols. Now he would bring back his ark to Israel. In verses 1 and 2, and we're not going to read through the whole chapter all at once. We're just going to break up the verses. We see first, after the Philistines got the ark, not only was their God brought down low, but also they're receiving this plague of mice, we find out, and also being stricken with tumors that they couldn't get rid of. Now they're seeking wisdom on what in the world must we do to get rid of this? How do we deal with this? Starting in verse 1 of chapter 6, it says, "And the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months." It wasn't just there for a week. "And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, saying, 'What shall we do to the ark of the Lord? Tell us wherewith we shall send it to his place.'" Now, I kind of made mention of it a little bit last time we were here, and I want to just show it continually as we go through. It's another point that I want to get through here. And I'll preface it with this. I don't think there is a great deal of emphasis being placed on words here, but there are some distinct words being used. Here, the Philistines, at this point, call it the Ark of capital L-O-R-D. Remember what I said that was? It's the name Yahweh. There's question on what the vowels are in that word. Hebrew is originally was written without any vowels, and they just spoke the vowels and knew what it was. It wasn't even a written language for a long time. But saying that, we've come to the conclusion where we're saying the name is Yahweh. But that's that personal name of God, the I Am, the ever-present God. It was his name, if you will. And then occasionally you'll come across another use of the name of Elohim. You'll see it multiple times in this passage. The God of Israel, the God of Israel. But that word Elohim is not as specific. That word Elohim is used to translate the name for God, as in the only God. But it also is used to translate small g, gods. You'll see that word come in your English version. You'll actually see it here today, and it will come from the word Elohim. but it's a less specific. It's not a bad thing. God chose to use that word. It's fine. But what I want to bring out occasionally here is a sign of respect, a recognition that this God was more than just one of the gods. One of the God guys up in heaven that they bicker amongst each other. It wasn't about that, because ultimately we know that there is only one God, Almighty, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God, holy, and everything else is just nothing. It's literally nothing. You can pretend it is God, but it is nothing. And that goes to Dagon. So the Philistines here were seeking wisdom, and they said in verse 1, and the ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners, so their religious leaders, saying, so what should we do with this ark of the Lord? They're calling it that. Again, I'm not saying that the emphasis is being placed on there's a conversion that's happened with these people, or they're already recognizing them as Yahweh. But the writer of this book chose to write it this way, and no doubt that was probably what went on. They were saying that. When it's quoted, I would take it as if this is what they said. So to some degree, they were not just calling him a God. They were calling him Yahweh. And they wanted to know what to do. So God has been displaying his displeasure for 7 months among these people, with tumors and mockery of their God and this plague of mice. The people here saw Yahweh declare his authority over Dagon in his own house. So whatever victory Dagon had given them in that battle, it was being questioned at this point. Another bit of information as we tie all this together as far as the preceding chapters is that Dagon, remember, he's in his own region, if you will, amongst his own worshipers, his own people, if you will, in his temple. And at that point, if you're going to think in light of pagan religions, wouldn't you think he would be at his most powerful? He's not out there in a country where he's not worshipped, but instead he is there in his own house, in his own temple, amongst his own people who worship him. Again, by what I understand in the ancient Near East in this time, that was a prevalent thought. When you worshiped a God, that God was in the region that you lived amongst your people, and that's where he was the most powerful and didn't really interact in other places. But you could have confidence. If we're in the camp of the Philistines, if we're there, then this is where our God's the most powerful. You can't come on our stomping ground. You're not going to be able to beat us on the home field. You're not going to be able to do any of that. That even goes, some have speculated, even with Jonah, when he, an Israelite, when he was told to go down to Nineveh, or go up to Nineveh, he decided to go to Joppa instead. And some have speculated because maybe he was thinking in that mindset, that messed up mindset. Well, if I go to Spain, away from God and his work and his hand, maybe he won't really be down there. He won't be working down there. But it was a false mentality, because we know God is ever present. He has a watchful eye over all things. He sees all things, and he's involved actively as a sovereign God in everywhere all at once. We take confidence in that. Just because I have an issue and a problem that needs to be dealt with doesn't mean you got to wait on mine to get dealt with before yours does. You go before the Lord, and he takes care of all things all at once. He hears and doesn't get confused by millions of prayers going up to him. But what God was doing here, it's just another one of those little things that's interesting to pick up. Here Dagon is in his most perceived, most powerful area amongst his people in his temple. And he's bowing down to Yahweh, because there is no other God before me. There is only one God, as the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4 says. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. There's only one. There's none other that you should put your faith in. The people saw the difference here. God was as he was working, as I said, as this chapter kind of shows God at work amongst the Philistines, he doesn't leave a question in their mind. This God is more powerful than Yahweh. Verse 2, as we finish up the point here, we see that there was as I had said, there was no conversion experience that was going on that they were wanting to interact with Yahweh, but they were going to their priests and trying to figure out what do we do about this? How do we, as we see God was working in this way, how do we deal with him? All right, verses 3 through 6. In this section, we see the pagan belief system displayed. And it says in verse 3, and they said, if ye send away the ark of the God of Israel. And this is the religious, the they there in verse 3 are the priests and the diviners speaking. And as that representative of Dagon, that's what they would have been. What do? They go all the way back to giving a sense of disrespect. If you send away the ark of the God of Israel, he's the Elohim, the God there that just stays over there and works over there. But he's not all powerful. He doesn't really belong here with us, but we'll recognize him at least as a God. So if you do that and send it not empty, but in any wise return him a trespass offering, then ye shall be healed, and it shall be known to you why his hand is not removed from you. Then said they, what shall be the trespass offering which we shall return to him? They answered, 5 golden nimrods or tumors, and so these are images of these things, and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines, for 1 plague was on you all and on your lords. Wherefore ye shall make images of your nimrods and images of your mice that mar the land, and ye shall give glory unto the God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hand from off of you, and from off of your gods, and from off of your land. Wherefore then do ye harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts. When he had wrought wonderfully among them, did they not let that people go? And they departed. So here we're seeing an interaction of what these priests were saying to do to take care of this. So the Philistines run to their religious leaders here for guidance on how to handle the dilemma that they were in. Dilemma kind of seems like a light word. But the situation, the struggle, the horrible position that they were in, as I said, the religious leaders do not make a distinction. They're not showing respect. This God, do this. This is what he likes to be done. Maybe this was from ignorance. Maybe they were doing that. Or maybe they were just stubborn and were disrespectful purposely. Their attitudes, even before what they were going to do, they said, you give them a trespass or a guilt offering. That's what you need to do. But before all that, they were still not a real sign of belief or respect other than Dagon got whooped in his own temple, so maybe we should do this. But their attitudes weren't in a right position. In verse 4, as it says, they were to give that trespass offering here. They were, as I say, kind of playing that religion. What exactly is a trespass offering? And if they're worshiping this God, who knows? Maybe these were studied men who looked at other religious belief systems. Maybe their own religion had a form of a trespass offering that they gave, a sacrifice that needed to be made. If you would, well, you don't have to, but in Leviticus, if you'll write down at least, Leviticus chapter 5, where we have the Levitical laws here, it explains what a trespass offering was, just so we have an idea of what they were supposed to do. So Leviticus chapter 5, verses 15 and 16 give us a little bit of a definition. And it says, if a soul committeth a trespass and sin through ignorance in the holy things of the Lord, then he shall bring for his trespass unto the Lord a ram without blemish out of the flocks, with by estimation by shekels of silver, after the shekel of the sanctuary for a trespass offering. And he shall make amends for the harm that he hath done in the holy thing, and shall add the 5th part thereto, and give it unto the priest. And the priest shall make an atonement for him with the ram of the trespass offering, and it shall be forgiven him. So again, this is speculation. Maybe they had an idea. Maybe they knew that they gave this guilt offering, and ultimately it was for the purpose of being forgiven for capturing the ark, or maybe, for whatever they needed to be forgiven for. This flippant mentality of this is what you should do. But what happens is the leaders, they didn't offer the offering as it was told in Leviticus. So again, this is where we're kind of on shaky ground. Maybe they didn't have the details. Who knows? I'm not trying to roast them without due information here. But what they gave for the offering, what was commanded by Yahweh or by God, was to do a ram and to make a sacrifice. And the blood of the sacrifice was to make atonement or to cover up their sin for a time. And then from that, they would have forgiveness. But what did they give? Well, you can't get blood out of a tournament, nor can you get blood out of a golden tumor or a golden mouse. There's no blood there. But it wasn't what God asked for. But yet they were seeking forgiveness, but in a flippant way. What was their perspectives? So to the Philistines, this offering was to make this God happy. Let me just make him happy and relieve this burden, this irritation that's upon us. It was a work. They were using their works to appease Yahweh. They did not surrender to him in this. They didn't truly recognize who he was. And what was the Lord doing as he commanded this trespass offering? That was a continual thing that was performed. It was ultimately for a relationship. We know that the law in the New Testament is defined for us that it was to point to the Messiah, it was to point to Christ. There was never enough blood to be shed from all the animals in the world that would take care of our sins, that would reconcile us unto him. But he was trying to interact with them. That law, as sacrifices were made, and atonement was brought to sins. Were they covered? Again, that word atonement means to cover the sin so that you can go before God and be right before him. God set that up so that people could have a relationship with him to some degree. But ultimately, today, we realize, as you realize with God then, that he wants the heart. He doesn't want the works. I alluded to that as well with Saul and Samuel, where it said that God does not desire sacrifices, but he desires a broken and contrite heart. That's what he wants. He wants us all the way, not a work before him. So they made these images, and as verse 5 goes on to say, I'll start at the very beginning. Wherefore ye shall make images of the emerods and the images of the mice that mar the land, and ye shall give glory unto the God of Israel. Peradventure he will lighten his hand from off of you, and from off of your gods, and from off of your land. Again, we see, this is that point I was talking about with the name Elohim. They call him the Elohim, the God of Israel, that general term. And then there's that next phrase, that God would lighten his hand off of your gods. They are still your gods. You still worship them. You still serve them. And you know what? They've got the same title. He's an Elohim too. He's just more powerful than our group. There was no true recognition, and it was just disrespectful. They were constantly showing a disbelief there. It's interesting too, just another point to point out, the way it's phrased here. So you're making these images that mar the land, and in all this you might give glory unto the God of Israel. That word, we get glory, also carries the thought of being heavy. You think of the weightiness of glory. And then it goes on to say, you're giving him glory. Why? This heaviness, you're showing him this heavy respect and glory, at least in an attempt. And then maybe from that weight may be lifted of his glory. I don't want to stretch that too far. But the heaviness there that comes from glory, and they're seeking a lightening of the hand of God. That pressure that he's putting on their gods, because he is holding them down and proving their uselessness. Okay, finally here in verse 6, they recall the Lord's work even amongst Israel and the Egyptians there. We won't go into detail because we've talked about that before already. So God does not hide himself from the world. He's not doing it there at all. He hasn't hidden himself now. God is at work, even in the most difficult times that we go through as individuals, as families, as as communities, as the countries that we live in. God is not because he's absent, but he is at work and he's doing things. And there are times, because he is God, because he is infinitely wise, we just don't get to know exactly what he's doing. But we do know that he said he works and he's faithful and he's consistent and he's sovereign. And that's what we fall back on as believers. Is God has not left us. He's right there in the midst of it with us. And at times we just need to go back and recall him and who he is. All right, verses 7 through 12. For the sake of time here, I'm going to speed up a little bit. Get bogged down there for a minute. It says, now therefore make a new cart. So here it is, the second test that they're bringing before the Lord. They test him there in Yahweh in the temple of Dagon. And now they're going to bring another test to see. It's kind of like a fail proof that these people are going to show that he's not that big of a God. And we'll see how he responds to that. Now, the instructions are, now therefore make a new cart and take 2 milk kine, on which there hath come no yoke, and tie the kine to the cart, and bring their calves home from them. And take the ark of the Lord, and lay it upon the cart, and put the jewels of the gold, which ye return him for a trespass offering, which wasn't correct to begin with, in a coffer or in a box by the side thereof, and send it away, that it may go. And see if it goeth up by the way of his own coast to Bethshemesh. Then he hath done us this great evil. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that smote us. It was a chance that happened to us. And the men did so, and took the milk kine, and tied them to the cart, and shut up their calves at home. And they laid the ark of the Lord upon the cart, and the coffer with the mice of gold and images of their emerods. And the kine took the straight way to the way of Bethshemesh, and went along the hill, or the highway, lowing as they went, and turned not aside to the right hand or to the left. And the lords of the Philistines went after them unto the border of Bethshemesh. So let's explain here what's really going on. So verses 7 through 9 are the instructions. Verses 10 through 12 are the actual working out of those instructions. But it's important to understand here, because we're seeing God at work. As I said, we're looking at God working, not being silent, but working and dealing with these people and showing he's a mighty God, and showing him that he is not silent. So they got this new cart that they make. And from this new cart, they're going to end up setting the ark on top of it. For the Philistines, we'll give them ignorance is bliss here, because they don't know how this thing's supposed to be carried. It's supposed to be carried with staves. These sticks stuck in the side, men carry this thing. David does this exact same heretical thing. And we actually may get to it in our study of Samuel. But does this exact same heretical thing. And it ends up causing a man's life. Uzziah dies because the cart drops the ark. But that's not the point this morning. So they get this new cart that they made, and they put it here beside 2 milk cows. So these are cows who just gave birth to calves. And 2 different things about this. This is a cow. These mother cows have never had a yoke put on them. Yet they're going to put a yoke on them. So this is the magnitude, if you want to say, of this test. They're trying, the Philistines are trying, the religious leaders are doing everything they can to prove this God. Because if anything goes wrong, except for this ark getting brought back to Israel, then it wasn't God. And we don't have to talk about him. He really wasn't that powerful, and it was just by chance that Dagon fell over, and God's not at work, and the Yahweh got defeated by our God. But man, God is just, because God can't, mocking them to scorn over this. But you see, they put the cart on, everything on there. I've said that like 100 times, but they only put it on the cart once. They got the yoke put on these new milk calves who are cows who have never had a yoke put on. This is not something they were used to. I would assume they would normally have bucked against this idea. But even beyond that, they take the calves that they were supposed to be giving milk to. They take them and they shut them away. So they're missing their job as the mother cow to take care of the young. This extreme that they're putting things, that the Philistines are putting things through. There's no way these cows are going to leave. And there's no way that the cows are going to leave their calves with a yoke that's never been on them. What happens? They do all these things, and it says specifically, somewhere here, I've lost my place. Verse 12, they do all these things. In verse 12 it says, and the kine took the straight way to Bethshemesh. This is the if you want to call it a fleece that was thrown out. I'll use that term by the diviners and the priests. The cows have to take the straight way to Bethshemesh and go no other way other than that. If he turns a different way, then he's not God. Yahweh is not powerful. And these cows go all the way up by the coastline as they're supposed to go, and they bring it where it's supposed to be. And it says in verse 12, and the kine took the straight way to the way of Bethshemesh and went along the highway. What were they doing the whole time? Not having forgotten they had cows or calves. They were lowing for those calves. In their own minds, they knew that this was, as a cow has a mind, it was supposed to be doing this, but it was not. And they turned not aside to the right hand or to the left hand. And the Philistines saw that happen. There was no doubt God was making himself known in this time. I am at work. I am God. You've done this before with other, no doubt these guys have done this kind of same test to other gods. And it's always failed. It's always proven, quote unquote, that the God that they were returning was not really a God. And God's like, oh, it's not happening. You're going to see me at work. Undoubtedly, you have no way to deny I'm at work. That's really where we need to be at in our own lives. Is there's nothing that can shake me to let me think that God is not at work. He is always at work, even in the darkest of times when we feel like His presence has been stolen away from us, or He seems absent. But we don't need to be like if I can draw a very generalized principle here off of these cows. We don't need to be moaning and lowing after the world as these cows were after their calves, as we're going for the Lord. But we serve Him with our whole heart, focused straight ahead, not looking to the right and to the left, but looking towards God and letting Him take care of us, take care of our needs. So all this happens, and we'll fly by here in these last few verses here, verses 13 through the rest of the chapter. It says, and they of Bethshemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark and rejoiced to see it. And the cart came into the field of Joshua, a Bethshemite, and stood there where there was a great stone, and they clave the wood of the cart and offered up the kine, the cows there, a burnt offering unto the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord and the coffer that was therein, or that was with it, wherein the jewels of the gold were, and put them on the great stone. And the men of Bethshemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices the same day to the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron the same day. And these are the golden emerods which the Philistines returned for a trespass unto the Lord. For Ashdod 1, for Gaza 1, for Ashkelon 1, for Gath 1, for Ekron 1. And the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines, belonging to the 5 lords, both of fenced cities and of the country villages, even unto the great stone of Abel, whereon they set down the ark of the Lord, which stone remaineth unto this day, in the field of Joshua the Bethshemite. And he smote the men of Bethshemesh, because they had looked unto the ark of the Lord. This is the Israelites. Even he smote of the people 50,000 and 70 men. And the people lamented, because the Lord had smitten many of the people with a great slaughter. And the men of Bethshemesh said, who is able to stand before this holy Lord God? And to whom shall he go up from us? And they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kirjath-jearim, saying, the Philistines have brought again the ark of the Lord. Come ye down and fetch it up to you. So we see the Lord makes his way back into Israel here, using a practice that he's mocking the whole way. Come on, guys, for common vernacular. I'm the Lord. Of course, these cows that I've created are going to do what I told them to do. But we see here, he brings it back to the people there. He brings, and the people are excited and receive it. Yet the Lord, in the latter part of the verses here, 19 through 21, the Lord is also working again and doing what he consistently does. As the Yahweh is at work here, God was not going to let the people there practice what he commanded them not to do. He said, don't touch the ark. Don't touch the ark. And apparently that is what was going on here. They were not showing the respect that they knew to according to his commandments. And he ends up slaying a great deal of those people because of their disobedience. And here, the Lord was, quote unquote, taken from us. And yes, he's back. But the Lord is making it very clear, lest anyone think that Yahweh was weak. He was worked with the Israelites in fulfilling his prophecy in chapter 5. Chapter 6 here, he is destroying the Philistines' mentality and their worship of false gods. And he is working again and being consistent with himself, consistently faithful to his word, as he does punish a great deal of people because of that. So today, as we conclude, the Ark of the Covenant was the place where God dwelt while on earth. He works where he pleases to make his name known. So this is where he dwelt when he was on earth, but it didn't limit him there. He wasn't limited just to the Israelites. He is the God of all creation because it's his creation, and he is faithful to be there and working. As we close this morning, we think about some things. I have a few things written down. We realize that God is always at work. And the question is that we ask ourselves, can I discern it? Or do I immediately jump to, God's abandoned me? God's not here. Or do I step back and say, no, God said he would never abandon me. He's at work, but what's he doing? Determined to recognize that God is faithful and that he is working. And reject any idea that he's not. Throw that away. That's garbage. It's something brought up by the devil and the flesh and the world itself. Recognize things that you may put before God. Idols in your lives. Take him seriously. Don't think we can sit here today and appease him by religious practices. Things that we have turned into religious practices at times. Attendance at church. He's not impressed with those things. He's asked us to do certain things, and those are commands for us to do those things, but it's not things that we impress him with, these works that we do that he's impressed with. But ultimately, as I said at the beginning, he wants our heart. He wants all of us. He's worth it all. We found that the English word worship being worthship this morning. God is worth every last ounce of our strength, our mind, our hearts. Be sure to give it to him. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for the time that we spent in it this morning. We're grateful for it. We're grateful for seeing yet again just an example of your work and your faithfulness, Lord. And we can fall on that whenever we feel alone and afraid and as if we've been abandoned. Maybe it's personally, or maybe it's nationally or globally. We know that you are at work amongst your people, your children that you've saved. Help us to cling to that, cling to the promises you've made, and go out encouraged this morning. In Christ's name.